Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new episode of the Orca Journals. Not the Orca Journals. What am I saying?
I thought we were doing the spy hop thing.
Oh, that's a podcast, Elena.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like we're not kind of there yet. This is an interview series talking to the experts and the most interesting people in the field, like Mark and you, Elena, of course. I'm just a fan. I'm nobody, so I'm just along for the ride.
Not true. You're a facilitator.
And so anyway, you know Elena, she's the expert in the group, and we're going to be talking to Mark here today. Mark, can you give us a little rundown about your bio and talk a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am Mark Leiren-Young. I'm joining you today from my home. I'm here at the University of Victoria. This is Territories of the Wasanich, Songhees, and Esquimalt peoples. And I guess I'm here with you because I've written a bunch of books about orcas and sharks. So I've written an adult book called The Killer Whale Who Changed the World about Moby Doll, first orca ever displayed in captivity. And that led to 3 kids' books about orcas. Well, actually, 2 kids' books about orcas, a baby book about whales, and 2 books about sharks. And next up is a book about octopus. And my background is not any of those things.
Man, I love octopus.
Oh, they are so cool.
Yeah,
I was talking with one of the world's experts on giant Pacific octopus all afternoon yesterday.
Wow.
So cool.
Oh God, can I be a part of that the next time you're doing something like that?
Oh, absolutely.
I want to be the fly on the wall. I'll just be like, oh, I want to listen to everything.
Oh, right. And I host the Scanner podcast, which is all about orcas, oceans, ecoethics, and the environment. I've been doing that for 4 years, and I keep forgetting to plug it, which is really bad because you should all be listening to it.
Man,
I do listen.
Thank you.
Elena is one of your biggest fans. She's been saying good things all the time about your podcast.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Well, he interviews the best of the best. He finds people from, and it's not really just about orcas. It's really like a combination of things. But he's interviewed Alexander Morton, Carl Safina, Franz de Waal. He really gets the best people, and they all have interesting perspectives on things relating to orcas, oceans ethics. He's had Captain Paul Watson, the sea pirate, on a couple of times. And that's really exciting. He's
great.
Cool. Captain
I love
cool.
He's kind of like he has a spunk. He's kind of like gives no shits. And
it's one of the things that I most admire about him. Just he is absolutely consistent in who he is. And the fact that he was recently thrown into Sea Shepherd, I'm like, of course you were, man. It was one of the first Greenpeacers. You can get into all sorts of parsing of who was the original Greenpeace, but he was one of the very first people with Greenpeace. Certainly one of the first people to risk their lives for a whale. And so, of course, splits with Greenpeace, and now something has happened with Sea Shepherd. And I'm so glad he's out in the oceans again, fighting for whales. He's just really an amazing,
and his ship's
amazing, inspiring person. Yeah, and he wrote the introduction to my book Sharks Forever, so which was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
He's really pretty intense.
2 things stand out about Paul to me. One is his passion. Every single thing he does, you see that he's just passionate, and he's like, he gives everything to his causes. And then the second thing you'll always notice online is his community. They are like an army, and they will defend that man left, right, and center.
And they're an army of volunteers, which is even crazier because most of them aren't paid.
Well, it was a conversation with him. Like, it is his fault I am in this world of orca. Because, I know that, we're not going to get into captivity as a thing, but I was interviewing Paul Watson in the 90s for Maclean's magazine. And for both of you, since you're not Canadian, Maclean's is Canada's version of Time magazine. It's our weekly news magazine. It's was the most prestigious magazine in the country. And I was doing a story, the never-ending story in Vancouver, about orcas in captivity, and thought, I should talk to Paul Watson. So I'm talking to Paul Watson, and he tells me the story of the first orca ever caught and displayed in captivity. And I had no idea that Orca was in Vancouver. And I'm like, how do I not know this story? And that whale's name was Moby Doll. And I obsessed over the idea that I thought it cannot be a coincidence that Vancouver's the birthplace of Greenpeace, birthplace of Sea Shepherd. It's where so many of the researchers are, and Moby Doll was here. And that launched an obsession I could not shake. And my background, we were joking about it right before we went on and started recording. I've done a whole lot more comedy writing than I've done science writing. I've written a lot of cartoons. I've written for kids. My background is not this. And when I started writing about whales, I guarantee that if my chemistry 11 high school teacher was not dead, the fact that I was nominated for best science writer in Canada would have killed him, because I got a grade you cannot legally give in a Canadian school anymore called a conditional pass. And the condition was that I never set foot in another science classroom.
What?
Because, yeah, we were
Oh my
doing,
God.
it was a combination of, yeah, I did, I think the thing that really got me in trouble was my sense of humor. And we were like we did one thing where we were supposed to do the phase of cell development, and I added in an extra one where the cell was smiling, and I called it happy phase. He did not like that at all. And we had to do something where we had to list off all of the attributes of life. And so he asked the question, how do you know that a candle isn't alive? And I went, because it doesn't scream when you light it on fire. He did not like that at all. And, in the bizarrely small world department, my lab partner, whose science career I almost scuttled because he barely passed because he was stuck with me as a lab partner, is one of the world's foremost experts in AIDS research. So my smart mouth almost cost the world a very valuable scientist. My friend, Dr. Robert Hogg, we've been friends with since that science class. So, but yeah, I ended up in science writing just sideways. And really, it was just, honestly, it was because I thought the story of meeting Moby Doll was science fiction. I thought I'd stumbled on a real life science fiction story about first contact with an alien creature. And Spider Robinson, who's an amazing science fiction writer, read the book and went, "You have found a real life science fiction story. This is a real life science fiction story. You found it. You were right." Because up until one day, June 1967, we believed orcas were monsters, and almost overnight, the perception shifted, and we went, "Oh wow, they're intelligent. They have empathy. What is going on? Does not compute. Does not compute." And I spent the next decade trying to give that story away, going, "I'm not a science writer. I am not a historian. I'm none of the things that you need to tell this story." And I had friends, and I go, "You make documentaries. You should do this." And they kept going, "No, you should do this. You're the one who's interested in it." No, not my thing. And that
They were
led
right,
to me.
though. They were right
Yep.
about you doing it, though. You did it in a very charismatic and accessible way that anybody can understand. The first time I read that book, I didn't know who you were. I found it on Amazon.
Oh,
I was
wow.
just looking for books, and I found it on Amazon, and I was like, wow, I really like this writing style. I really like his voice. And everything was explained so well and with so much compassion for the situation. And I was like, I have to get more of his books, and I ran out of books to buy. I'm sorry.
What's so funny is that my editor and I would have these discussions where she went, "Cut the jokes. You have to cut." Because I've actually won, again, not known outside of Canada. I've won what's known as the Stephen Leacock Medal for Humor for writing the funniest book in Canada. That was my book pretty much prior to this one. And so people were very confused that I was switching from that to whales. And like, I wrote one line I was like really proud of it. Like, wow, this is one of the funniest lines I've ever written. And my editor went, "Yes, that may be. And it is completely inappropriate for this book." It's like she was going over going, "Take out the jokes, take out the jokes, take out the jokes." Because it's a very serious story and I'm trying to make you cry. She's like, "Just leave some of the jokes on the table, please." But yeah, so if you read some of the kids' books are funnier.
Well, I have a question for you. So you've been around for a lot of this transformation of where orcas turned into intelligent beings from scary monsters. How do you feel about saying that now, knowing and having interviewed Lori Marino and learning about their brains and about their complexities and how interesting that they really are? How do you feel about the dichotomy there?
Well, it's interesting. You were talking about one of the interviews I did for Scanna with Frans de Waal. I've interviewed both Lori and Frans de Waal for Scanna and for the books and for the documentary I'm doing about the endangered southern residents. And the biggest thing that has become my obsession, and where I've become quite vocal, and I've been writing op-eds about this and talk about this fair bit, not just on Scanna, but in local media and national media in Canada, about anthropodenial, which is a Frans de Waal term, which is pretending that animals do not have emotions like us. And it's funny, the first time I really encountered this, I was interviewing one of the world's most respected orca scientists, Lance Barrett-Leonard, who was one of the first people to really discover that orcas have a culture. And he was talking about he was tired of apologizing for anthropomorphizing because you had to wrap yourself in knots to avoid it. And where I sort of switched gears and became completely militant is, I'm sure you remember the story of Tahlequah, the orca who carried her dead daughter for 17 days. And I started seeing stories in the media about how the orca appears to be grieving. I'm going, no, you may see humans appear to be grieving. I have been at funerals where people were actually very happy about the person who was in the box. They appeared to be grieving, but they were not. Tahlequah wasn't faking it. And I just started saying that every place that I could. I mean, these are animals with the same mirror neurons we have, which are the same part of our brain that lets us process complex emotions like love, embarrassment, and grief, right? So they have the same neurons, except arguably they are more empathetic than we are. And they spend more time with their families and their communities than we do. So to dance around the idea that they're grieving just infuriated me. So I ended up following that story, and some of that work and the books that I've done led to me getting to write an orca exhibit at the Royal British Columbia Museum. And that exhibit is touring the world. It's in Oregon right now. Hopefully it'll get out to like both of your countries. But I was very much, I was not just writing, I was consulting on it. And again, I was pretty much militant on the idea of using names for the orcas and not numbers. Now we'll probably talk about him again, but Ken Balcom, and the importance of numbering these orcas for scientific reasons, where you go, this is the letter represents the pod they're in, the number represents the birth order they're in. And as a scientist, that is really important. As a non-scientist, it is absolutely meaningless, and there's no reason any non-scientist should be using them. We should be using names because we use numbers to distance ourselves. And so I said this so many times when they were working on the exhibit here, that they agreed to do something that I don't think any other museum would have done. Certainly, pretty sure they wouldn't have done it if I wasn't annoying them about it, which is instead of identifying Slick as J2, was one of the original J-pod whales. Turned out not to be from J-pod. That's another story. Or Scarlet as J50. They identified them by name with a number in brackets, as opposed to by number with a name in brackets. And I was so militant about this that when I was invited to speak at a symposium of scientists in British Columbia, and I'm pretty sure I was the only speaker who did not either have a doctorate or was not in the process of getting my doctorate in a science-related field. I have a master's of freaking fine arts in creative writing, playwriting. I was definitely the only speaker there with one of those. the museum said, you have to talk to the scientists about your names and numbers thing. And I did. And it's the scariest speech pretty much that I've ever given, because they were looking at me like, whoa. And it was fascinating because they laughed at first. Then there was silence because I basically called them out. And I called them out over Tahlequah because I said, you have the entire world media watching. And you had People magazine. You had the most mainstream media in the world paying attention to you. And you broke out J35 enter neonate. And I'm going, I've now been covering orcas long enough that I know all of your scientific terms. I've never heard you break out neonate before. You were working so hard to create emotional distance. For what? For who? How did that in any way serve these orcas? So I basically called out the scientific community, which was very scary for somebody with a Master's of Fine Arts in playwriting.
I'm pretty sure it's on camera somewhere. I think I saw you doing them out on YouTube, and it was pretty impressive, actually. That's some courage that I do not have.
Oh, it was funny because afterwards, I was the only person not asked to answer questions. It was like, thank you, Mark. Shh, moving on. But then they kept referencing it through the entire convention. And by the end of it, I was asked if they could share it online. And because it got everybody talking.
It did.
Because it really did feel like this phenomenal wasted opportunity where the entire world wanted to hear the story of the endangered southern resident orcas. This phenomenal community of orcas. We're down to, I think the number maybe 75 because we just had a couple new babies. But this phenomenal community, the world is watching, and you're breaking out the numbers, and you're breaking out the most scientific, distancing terms you can come up with to show that you've got a doctorate. No, don't do that.
Stay on topic of that. Orca conservation is an important topic in today's world for a number of
Absolutely.
reasons. Around Portugal and Spain and those areas. But how do you believe your work, Mark, whether to writing or filmmaking or podcasting, can contribute to raising awareness and fostering positive change in the protection and welfare of the orca and their marine environments?
What I'm really pushing for as much as possible is basically recognizing that if orcas showed up tomorrow in a spaceship, we would go, this is intelligent life. By any metric we've got. Basically, they pass any test we've got for intelligence and that does not require opposable thumbs. And this is something that Lori Marino started with when she was getting into the mirror test, when she was originally testing dolphins. That you start to go, yeah, they're absolutely freaking self-aware. They have a language, they have a culture. And that's actually the biggest thing that I feel like, in some ways, it's the biggest thing that I can push that a scientist can't. Because there's nobody who's going to call me out over, you're anthropomorphizing. Yeah, and why do I care? I'm not a member of your club. But
you don't have the degree for them to argue with about it, and they feel safe with that, but they shouldn't.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'm not part of the club, and what's been really fascinating, right? In Canada, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans governs pretty much everything that happens here. And in terms of research, who gets access to studying, who gets grants, and the environmental reporter for the Vancouver Sun, which is the biggest paper in Western Canada, biggest newspaper in Western Canada, and one of the biggest papers in the country, called me up when he was retiring and said, I want to talk to you about orcas. And I said, thanks, but why? Right? Because I've got my list of 20 experts who I would call, and it would go longer if I was thinking about it, who I would call ahead of me. And he went, because you're the only person not employed, not dependent in any way on anybody for anything. So he said, you're going to give me the most frank answer on what's going on. And like one of the thing he really wanted to talk about was that the government of British Columbia, the government of Washington State, keep announcing all sorts of new laws to protect endangered orcas. We have plenty of laws to protect endangered orcas. None of them are actually enforced, right? So we have all of these things where it's like, we've got these grand fines where nobody's ever fined. They get warnings, right? It's difficult to enforce. There's nobody actually on the water to enforce any of these things. So from a public point of view, you go, oh, wow, we're doing a lot. And then you dive in at all. No, you're not. In Washington State, they announced it was like a phenomenal amount. I don't want to get the numbers wrong, so I'll be careful with what I say, but I think it was close to $1 billion. Look at all the money we're putting into orca protection. Like, so what they did was they had to upgrade their ferries. They went, oh, we're making the ferries quieter for the orcas. They had to fix some culverts. They went, oh, look, we're making the water nicer for the orcas. So anything that was done that improved anything to do with ocean health, they declared orca rescue money. Well, in Washington State, what they really need to do is take out a dam. They don't really talk about that. In Canada, we really need to do is clean up the Fraser River.
Dams out?
Yeah, so the things that we actually have to do that would actually move the dial, those don't necessarily happen. The things that look really good and make for quick headline hits, those happen.
Those happen. The ones that get votes.
So, yeah, so I guess the things that I can do is I can say stuff like that because I'm not really bound to anybody, and I can do what I do, which is push the names are important. Looking at these as individuals is important. There's an organization that I've been doing a bit of work with called Legal Rights for the Sailor Sea. And they look at trying to, this is a group based in Washington State, and they're looking at, again, trying to create rights for orcas because there's no, this was a conversation again with Laurie Marino. There's no rationale for why they don't have rights. The rationale is it would be inconvenient because, again, not coming from this world, I ask what I keep assuming are dumb questions where I'm going, okay, walk me through this. Why, what's the legal rationale for why an orca doesn't have rights? And there really doesn't seem to be one. Like, what's the legal, define for me, sentience, intelligence, and tell me why there are no protections.
Yeah.
You don't really get one.
In England, going on that point, Mark, in England they gave octopus the right of sentience. Like
I was so excited about that.
Yeah.
They've acknowledged that octopus are sentient in England. In America, octopus are not even animals. They are things right now.
They're still property.
And I had a great conversation because I'm writing this kid's book about octopus. And I basically went, and I was speaking with one of the world's top experts on octopus. And I said, here's my theory. America doesn't want to give octopus any rights at all because the scientists want the right to cut them up as much as possible to see how the arms regenerate. And he kind of went, yeah, that's a pretty good theory.
That's
right?
a good theory.
That what they're because they're testing the regeneration, they're testing some of the parts of the bodies do things we can't begin to understand. Like working on octopus is amazing because I keep going, so why is it we don't know? We don't, like, it's so cool hearing we don't know over and over and over again.
Well, who doesn't want 9 brains?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But this was one of the most interesting things. Again, I'm coming to this with no science background at all, right? Like science for me stopped in Chem 11. Beyond that is books. And interviewing really interesting people and asking them anything that sparks for me. And one of the things that's been really amazing working on these kids' books, I spoke with somebody on their studies on shark relationships. And one of the things about my shark book was I went, wow, there's so many books about sharks. How can mine be any different? And I realized how mine could be different was basically if it was written before the last few years, nobody was studying shark personality. Nobody was studying the idea that sharks might have friends or relationships. Really, all anybody was studying was how to find them, how to kill them, how to eat them. Maybe they were looking to bodies. And I kept hearing the term early on when I was doing my work around Moby Doll. They called that the era of slice and dice science. But really, most of the science was like, okay, marine science was, where do we find it? How can we kill it?
Mark,
Right.
here's a question for you.
Yeah.
But before that, okay, so you got to plug your books, your kids' books. So
Okay.
list them off there, please.
I'll list them off. So I've got Orcas Everywhere and Sharks Forever. Those are middle school books about orcas and sharks. They're really designed to be introductions to orcas and sharks that you would not be embarrassed to read anywhere from the ages of 9 and up. Like they look like the Orca book, especially, looks like more like a coffee table book than it looks like a kid's book. Shark book, almost.
Photography.
Yeah, the photography is just stunning. I mean, and thanks for saying that. I know you just got yours. I did a sort of elementary school book called Orcas of the Sailor Sea. Beautiful images. Like, can't stress enough how stunning the photos are. Like, seriously, you can skip the words. They're just really pretty. And I did 2 baby books. A baby book about sharks called Big Shark, Small World, and a baby book about whales called Big Whale, Small World. And again, this was just introducing babies. I'm really proud of the shark baby book because I'm trying to fight the idea that sharks are dangerous. But the shark book basically starts with sharks don't want to eat you. You can stop reading now. Right? Like, because I do not for the life of me understand how we are decades on from the movie Jaws, and yet that still defines the shark in the popular imagination. That it baffles me. It's like, the way that Jaws still influences the way we see sharks, you would think that it's shown every year like a Christmas Carol.
It is.
But you think like it was like, yes, I guess Shark Week maybe. Like it's like, how scared can we be of sharks in any given day?
Well, I mean, like I'm in America and it's a household family film. Like you watch it and it is on Shark Week, but like it's always on like television and it's like it doesn't go away. It's just iconic classic. And it has
I see kids wearing Jaws shirts.
The thing with Jaws is they simplify it. If you go into the water, you die. Mm-hmm. And they did the theme tune, which is 2 notes. So it's easy to remember that sharks kill and you die if you go into the water. And I think
they kill fewer people than, like, the fact they kill fewer people than pretty much they kill fewer people than dogs, cats, probably budgies, right? Like kangaroos, rhinos, horses, mosquitoes, so many like
well, actually, like vending machines kill more people than sharks.
Absolutely.
Vending
the most dangerous
falling vending machines.
The most dangerous shark really is not even the great white one. It's the actual tiger shark. That's the one to look out for. But anyway, besides that, I've got going back to my question, Mark. Right, so you're clearly a storyteller, okay, and you have all these different mediums that you work through. So, in terms of Orca, what is your favorite medium? And then after that, which one has the biggest impact on Orcas?
Okay, my favorite medium by far, which makes like no sense at all to most people, although may make more sense to you, being being where you are, because you've got a tradition of radio drama. Radio is magic. So Scanna is great. Like being able to talk to people on the podcast is great. But the first place I told the story of Moby Doll was as a radio documentary for CBC. And just that you can build an entire world without needing to access the money. I love filmmaking. So I did make a movie about Granny called The 100-Year-Old Whale. I'll share some links with you because it's finally available everywhere in the world for free. A couple places have licensed it. But audio, the direct connection. I feel like audio just goes straight into your mind and into your imagination. Playwriting, which is not necessarily the best way to tell any of these stories, is my happy place as well. and filmmaking books. But I'm really unfaithful to mediums. I really do switch mediums more times than most writers, and don't really have any particular preference to writing for little kids versus writing for adults. So it's a joy getting through the kids' books. But yeah, all over the place. But audio's magic. And Neil Gaiman is my favorite writer in the world, has also said the same thing.
I love
But if
Neil.
you had a choice
Master
between any of them,
storyteller.
radio drama,
Yeah.
for sheer storytelling power, radio drama.
Mhm.
So how
And
many
another one
viewers
there
and how many
for
listeners do you have on Scana now?
Thousands and thousands. I don't know the exact number, but like Scana's numbers get ridiculous because like we get these random things like you are number one in the nature category in Iceland. What? We have phenomenal ratings in Ireland. I have no idea why. So like Iceland, like countries that begin with I, apparently our ratings are great. But we'll get these like we just got you're in the top 20 in this category in Russia. What? Like so we get listeners around the world that seems to depend on who the interview subject is, and how they pop. And I have no idea how or why people find out about it. We're
You've
you know,
interviewed
we're
Eric
not
Coit,
the
and
world's
he's done
best
work
at
out of
promoting
Russia.
it. Sorry?
You've
Okay.
interviewed Eric Coit, and he's done a lot of work out of Russia, and so that might be why those Russian views were pretty spiked because they heard Russia and it was about Russian stuff.
I can tell you that after we interviewed Eric Coit, our site was hacked by Russian hackers, which sounds hilarious until it actually happens to you. In theory, it sounds like, yes, we were hacked by Russian hackers. Like, isn't that hilarious? No, it's not, because it meant a whole bunch of rebuilding our website.
Man,
And
I build websites. I build websites. Now they're only WordPress websites, okay? But
yeah, that's what ours was.
Ours is. So I put a lot of security going into these things. And the number one country that tries to hack into just random websites is Russia. Now they could be using VPN proxies. I don't know, but I like that's just the way it goes.
Like Express.
It was right after our Eric Coit interview. It happened right after we interviewed Eric Coit about capturing orcas in Russia. So it was like, okay, maybe it's a coincidence, but maybe somebody didn't like Eric Coit talking about how you shouldn't be capturing orcas in Russia.
Well, Eric said that there was a lot of controversy about them being there in the first place and that they didn't want them to leave any permanent surveillance because it was considered a threat by the Russian government.
Yeah. Well,
didn't Putin say that, hey, what do you want me to do? These animals are worth a lot of money or something like I'm paraphrasing, but that's something I think he said like so.
Yeah. But it's interesting mentioning Eric. There is part of why this is such a joy to do is the people that I get to interview have been so kind and so generous, right? Like Eric read my books to make sure they were okay in terms of their facts before they were published, right? Like Eric did that.
Was really nice
John Ford did it. I was like, could you maybe check it out and give me a blurb? Like, oh, here are my notes. What, you actually read the whole thing? Yes. Like it was like they were really great. Oh, they were really great notes, right? It was like, did you know this little fact? Did you have this little fact? And awesome. Just shockingly generous. It's been a delight getting to know
Elena does that for the group, by the way. She'll pop in, she'll say, actually, you know what? So she does that for the group, which is great.
Actually.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you something that's not related to Orca. Okay.
Cool.
And it's to do with the green chain. And the green chain.
Oh, wow.
So can you actually give a little background about the green chain, first of all, and then I'll go into the question.
That is very exciting to get to talk about. Because the green chain also sort of made me accidentally into a science writer. I wrote a movie that was a collection of 7 interconnected monologues that was done docudrama style. And the idea was that if you sort of caught one of them, you might be fooled into thinking these were real. So they were based on a combination of the issues facing forests in the Pacific Northwest, which is, the world now knows, those forests are on fire. So it's based on some of the issues in the BC forest, the Washington forest, and featured 7 amazing actors several of whom either won or were nominated for awards in their work. Going back to the whale connection, August Schellenberg, who was the star of Free Willy, was in it. Tricia Helfer and Tomo Pennicott from Battlestar Galactica were featured in it. And these were all based on interviews and led to a podcast series where I interviewed some of the world's top experts on forestry. So that sort of led into Scanny years later. So, and I never get questions with the green shit. So you've just made my day. So now I'm really curious.
That's cool. You know, it's funny that it went back to Orca again. But all right, so this project, the Green Chain, I would like to know how it influenced your perspective on environmental conservation.
Oh wow. What that's the Green Chain sparked. There's a story that I told in the book that won the Hume Award called Never Shoot a Stampede Queen, which was based on a year that I spent covering news for the Williams Lake Tribune, very, very small town in British Columbia, cowboy country in British Columbia. And I was raised in Vancouver, like I said, birthplace of Greenpeace. Basically, you grow up hugging trees if you're out here. And suddenly I'm out in a cowboy town and a logging town. And I'm interviewing for real cowboys and loggers. I'm hanging out on, I'm covering stampedes, rodeos. I am covering forestry. And the Green Chain, the spark for this, years before I did anything with it, I interviewed somebody who was showing off this machine called a danglehead processor, and he was talking about how it did the work of 5 men in it would take 5 men a week to do this, and now I can do this in a few hours. And if not for those damn environmentalists, we'd still have so much work. And I'm thinking, no, I think the machine may be more of an issue than the environment. I can't say this because I'm in the middle of nowhere with this logger. And that's not the story. You know, I haven't been sent to be my 21-year-old Greenpeace self. I've been sent to tell the story of this guy's wonderful new machine. And I just never shook that. But what I also never shook was that everybody that I met who was cutting down trees loved trees. And the hook for the Green Chain is that these are imaginary interviews, but everybody I interview, the question starts with, how do you feel? The interview starts with me asking the question, how do you feel about trees? The person then says, I love trees, and then shares the relationship. So you've got the guy with the danglehead processor showing off that machine, which was the most expensive thing we shot. We've got Tricia Helfer playing a celebrity who's out there basically doing a variation of like what Pamela Anderson has been doing out on the West Coast for Orcas and trees. You've got a firefighter, and all of these people going, I love trees. And what was so wild was that I then did this podcast series, and I decided I would start it the same way, or include the same question that I included in the documentary. And almost every single person had a variation in their answer when I asked, how do you feel about trees? Was I love trees. And I was like, how do I share all these perspectives? How do I get all of these diverse voices in here? So the way the Green Chain influenced things, and it's the way I'm sort of wired to begin with, the number of shades of gray and the importance of getting people from different worlds to talk to each other and listen to each other. And what's so funny with that movie was we would have environmentalists who were upset with the movie because the people in the forest, the forestry workers, were presented too nicely. Forestry workers were upset because the environmentalists were presented too nicely. So I showed this in Williams Lake, and they're like, "Yeah, you make the environmentalists look too good." I showed this in the city, and it's like, you say the forestry worker loves trees. Yeah, it's true, right? So that was the influence. Was just me going, I'm going to do 7 points of view, and none of them are going to look great. And one of the things that I was really proud of with that was you could ask 1,000 people about that movie to order the 7 people they agreed with or disagreed with most. And was all across the board, was always different. And we won a whole bunch of awards because I think people thought we were real. We won this major award in Barcelona. So I actually met Rob Stewart from Sharkwater. We were the two Canadians at this environmental film festival in Barcelona. It is the only place I think the Green Chain beat Sharkwater for anything. And I am pretty sure it's because they thought the Green Chain was real. So it was kind of hilarious. But Rob and I became friends out of that, which is how the Shark Book, really how the Shark Book happened, was me getting to know Rob.
Well, I got a pitch for you for your next doc. And
sure.
It would be the problem we face with Canuck salmon. So the fishermen versus the conservationists. So you same approach as the green green chain, but you're going.
We've had that. It's funny. I've toyed with the idea of doing that with salmon.
Go away.
So now you put it back in my head. You're dangerous.
Well, you know what? It needs to happen. It needs to happen. I'm on the group, and I'm looking at that problem, and I'm like, I want to talk to the fishermen. I want to talk to the conservationists, and they don't talk to each other. Or if it does happen, it's like in your face. I've caught this salmon. This is coming home for me for dinner. Kind of like inflammatory. It's trying to get the response, nagging or that whistle, dog whistle, or whatever you want to call it. And it's not productive. It provides no value. Well, what you do with the green chain, that will narrow the gap, and that will create a communication chain that will, you'll have your circle of your communication framework going on.
Well, it's funny. I didn't know. I've been having a conversation about this with a theater project. When I did the green chain, I had never heard of verbatim theater. I never knew that you could do theater where you just interviewed real people and you actually used their words. I've now done that for a play, and it was an amazing experience. So I would interview real people, and then I'd shape the conversations. So the green chain very much came out of that. And I'm with you on the salmon. And one of the interesting things, because I've covered that story a little bit, not as much as I'd like to, but same thing you see with orcas. It's pay no attention to the big thing going on. We'll talk about whale watchers. We won't talk about tanker traffic, right? So we'll talk about little boats. We won't talk about big boats. We won't talk about the polluting things. We'll talk about acoustic pollution. We won't talk about the Fraser River, right? We won't talk about the actual pollution. We'll talk about noise pollution. And with salmon, you get the same thing. And with salmon, what you get a lot of is we'll talk about sports fishers. We won't talk about commercial fisheries. So pay no attention to commercial fisheries. Pay no attention to sea lice and salmon farms, which is Alexander Morton's thing.
But don't forget about the tribes, Mark.
Oh, absolutely.
That's another one that they love to throw in. They should
have rights as well.
Yeah, they love to throw in. Oh, but what about the tribes? Do you know what I mean?
I have to say,
and trying to create something divisive there, which is
and they do, especially because America, I mean, I don't know who I'll get in trouble for saying this, but America does not value First Nation rights. They don't, and they've been trying to diminish them this whole time. And so one of the biggest things I've seen is any efforts to reestablish those connections with First Nation people and restore the salmon. It's interconnected, but they're telling you to look over here and they're doing jazz hands and they want you to totally ignore it while they yank those rights right back out from under these people.
Yeah. You see that in Canada as well, a little less so, because I think the First Nations here are more of a political force.
Yeah.
Although the Lummi Nation in Washington State, freaking amazing. And they're doing such phenomenal things in terms of conservation and awareness raising. And some of the nations here are now getting more actively involved, going, you know what? You're really doing a crappy job. And since we actually have these rights, we're going to exercise them, and we're going to watch how the orca are being treated. And we're going to weigh in more and more publicly on how you're messing up the salmon. And it really has been a phenomenal shift, even in the time since I've started doing this. Because I would do stories early on, and I would be actively looking, going, which nations are involved with this particular issue, and being told, well, no one really, except, maybe the lummy over here, maybe the hide over here, or whatever. And now, very prominent. Now I don't have to ask or look. I'm not searching for which nations are involved. It's very clear which nations are actively getting involved in which issues, and it's phenomenal to see. Very exciting.
Yeah,
that's positive.
Yeah,
there's a three-pronged approach to that idea, and I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that happening, where you bridge the gap. I think that conversation needs to happen.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so much of my work has always been about getting people in a room to listen to each other and not just talk at each other. But again, that's traditionally been my theater work, right? Like, so that turned into my film work. The Green Chain sort of evolved out of a radio piece, which turned into a stage piece, which is turning back into a stage piece. But the salmon, that was a dangerous thing to bring up with me.
Yeah, it's controversial.
Like my head is just spinning, right?
Yeah, I know. I could see the gears going off there.
Yeah, he's got them. I heard that you were running for political position recently. Was that still going on?
No, I ran, didn't get elected, but again, that came out of frustration with just trying to be heard on some of the stuff that I've run into in terms of going, all right, why aren't we doing more to protect the Salish Sea? Why aren't we doing more to protect the animals in it? Why aren't we talking more about the quality of the water? And the municipality that I live in, Saanich, it's actually larger than Victoria. It's one of those things where the suburb is sort of bigger than the actual city. And so the city that you'll have heard of is Victoria, which is stunning. And I actually live across the street, like just the magic of, random divisions in geography for municipalities. But what I liked about Saanich is that it's a mix of urban and rural. And so I thought, you know what, if I run here, I can actually talk about watersheds. Like I can talk about and have potentially an impact. We've actually got salmon here that we're looking after. I'm going, okay, that's an amazing thing to be able to look into and talk about. But while I was doing that, I also teach at the University of Victoria. I know how bad there are some really horrific things around being able to find accommodation here. So I ended up talking a lot about student housing and other issues as well. But it's like I've become progressively more political by accident, just by nature of doing the work that I'm doing with the orcas and the oceans. And so people keep going, well, you've become political anyway. Why don't you just step out and take a shot?
Just, dip your toes in. But did you find that it gave you more of a platform to get your ideas out? And do you feel like it's actually expanded some of your ideas being more regular in the community?
Oh, it really did. And one of the things that was so exciting, like I'm going, I lost and I kind of feel like I won, because one of the things that I pushed really hard when I was talking my campaign were new ways of looking at nature and valuing nature. And there's a wonderful program that's sort of piloted out of another part of British Columbia, sort of near here, Sunshine Coast, where you actually put a value on natural resources. So you don't treat them as externalities. Another term that I learned, again, you don't learn terms like this getting a fine arts degree. So a term that I learned doing interviews on environmental issues. And I did a book with and about Sephora Berman, who's one of Canada's most controversial environmentalists, who's done a lot of work around climate and forests. And that came out of the Green Chain podcast. So going back to the Green Chain, we just hit it off when I interviewed her for the podcast. She went, "Want to write a book with me?" I went, "Sure." And I became utterly obsessed with the concept of externalities and the idea that you could pollute something and you weren't responsible for paying for it. And yet somehow these companies that were polluting things and not paying for it were complaining about artists like me getting government handouts. I'm going, whoa, whoa, whoa. We're cleaning up the entire lake that you ruined. You don't have to pick up the tab for that. It doesn't go on your bill. I was so floored. Again, not coming from that world at all. It just shocked me. I'm like, I just assumed if companies made a mess, they were responsible for cleaning it up, and was floored to discover they weren't. So, yeah, just the idea that this community had gone, you know what? We're not going to say that forests are an externality anymore. We're going to place a value on our forest. We're going to place a value on the parkland. So if you're going to mess with a tree, you have to you have to consider the value of that tree. And I thought that was just awesome. And so I started raising this in all candidates meetings, and I would have various candidates afterwards saying, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. And I was so thrilled. Almost like the first week after the campaign, I saw the new mayor of Saanich tweet about, we were considering this new thing from Gibson's. He didn't say we're considering this new thing from Gibson's that Mark talked about all candidates. But he did. But so what? What he did say was, we're looking at this as a way to value our resources. I just I win.
You got his attention.
I win. I got that in, and I don't have to sit in council meetings every week.
Well, man, that's the power of storytelling.
It is. But I think that you had mentioned earlier that things that you thought were dumb questions was like very much like looking at things and saying like, this is common sense, but why isn't it common sense to be a policy? And I think that's one of the, that's like your golden ticket, is you're always like, why doesn't this make sense? And then everyone's like, maybe it doesn't. And then corporations tend to be like, it does make sense, and here's why we marginalize it. And it's like, that's not good.
Well, I've had a few scientists talk to me about some of the stuff that I've brought up about orcas, and they've just gone, you get that you're looking at it in an entirely different way, because you're not coming at it the same way we are. So again, the names and numbers. So wonderful organization in the US, the Alan Alda Institute, which is all about teaching scientists how to communicate. And what's really funny, going back to my story about my best friend in high school, who's the AIDS expert, every once in a while, Bob would tell me something and I'd help him translate it. I joked I'd translate it into human, right? Because he'd tell me something, he'd walk me through the scientific terms. And I go, okay, how's about we translate it like this? And like I worked within a project, we were working on some of the AIDS prevention measures, HIV AIDS prevention measures, and we're talking about safe injection sites. I'm going, what if you explain it like this? And we'd walk through it, and realizing that that was really what I was trying to do. Was I was trying to go, all right, I'm gonna get you to explain it. It's one of the reasons I'm loving doing kids books, is I'm sort of doing the same thing, where I'm going, all right, walk me through this like I don't know any of these terms, because I don't. And then I've got to get them to where I can translate them so that a 9-year-old can understand this term. And I've been doing the same thing for adults pretty much my whole life, where I'm going, all right, walk me through, explain why externalities make sense. Oh, they don't. Okay, that's interesting. But walk me through these various terms, walk me through these various issues. And I mean, some that you start to follow the money and go, oh, okay, I get it.
It always makes sense when you follow the money.
Yeah. This is the things that I did on purpose in my life were journalism and theater. The other stuff just kind of happened. So TV and film happened accidentally. Playwriting was on purpose. Journalism was on purpose. I always did both of those things. So I'm used to asking questions and doing that translation. But yeah, it's been interesting how things have shifted.
You always do things your way.
Pretty much, yeah. I've been a freelance writer my entire life. I've never really had a gig where where it's like I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm doing something for somebody else their way.
It's
We should
clear
really
that one of
roll
your
out your
strengths.
audacity and give it to people in the scientific community so they felt like they really could ask for these changes, because you don't have those inhibitions. And I think we should just kind of take some of yours and distribute some of it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to work on something for Scana where I realize I've attended a few conventions lately where we talk about southern resident orcas, and what is said privately is not what is said publicly. The
Oh, I'm
concerns that are shared publicly are not the concerns shared privately, because nobody really wants to upset the funding bodies. Things like,
God damn it.
nobody wants to lose their research access. And I'm just going, you know what? I don't have any of that funding. I don't have any of that research access. I've got a bunch of nice people on Patreon who send us some money every month so that we can do what we're doing. Right. And beyond that, it's paying for myself by doing what I do, writing and teaching evic. So I'm not dependent on these sources for my livelihood. So I've got the luxury of criticizing them. Although that takes time and effort, right? Like some of this is just,
Sure.
I did a freedom of information request. They have different names in different countries, but basically I did it where I received a massive amount of data. It's like, okay, I just don't have the time to wade through this yet. Where I'm going, okay, what's really going on with how we are or aren't protecting the orcas? So that's something I want to dive into.
The Freedom of Information Act? God, it would be great if they had an onboard AI that they just knew all that record. Their entire library, and then you could get it off them in a nice little, package.
If ChatGPT could actually figure out how to parse the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages that I've got, and actually understand every time I hit the word redacted what is likely hidden there,
yeah,
we'd be golden.
It probably could predict it and everything, couldn't it? Yeah,
at some point.
Yeah, at some point. So yeah, we're coming up to an hour now. We're actually a little bit over an hour.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been great crack. We can continue if you want to, or we could end it there if you want to. What do you want?
I am totally, if you want to ask me more stuff, I'm totally happy to be here. It's very exciting to be talking to you too.
It's exciting to talk to you. How do you feel about being the one interviewed opposed to being the one who interviews people?
It's easier. I don't have to prep all the questions. Although, wow, you've thrown me some wonderful curves. I so didn't expect the green chain. And like I said, that salmon thing, I'm gonna have trouble shaking that salmon thing. I'm gonna be mulling that all night.
With it.
Yeah, it's very exciting. So, is there anything else you wanted to hit?
Well, I mean, you're so close to the southern residents and the Salish Sea. And there's been a lot of recent things that have come out that are public that aren't being quite addressed the way that maybe they should be. But the skin lesions on the orcas currently, any more about that, more on the private side about those skin lesions and about what might be causing them. I always have theories, but
honestly, I was just really excited that they were all back this year, right? Because some of them have been in pretty rough condition. Excited that you got the 2 new babies. Really glad one of those babies is female. Yeah. Oh, they're very cute, but also we need more females.
We need more babies.
Desperately. Skin lesions, I'm just assuming it's all of the awesome pollution we've got going on here. But you've also got them going into different waters, right? So I haven't done a deep dive with any of the scientists. I know if you were talking to Josh, he'd be more up to speed on where that's at than I am. He's probably
He's going to be coming in August. We're doing an interview in August with Josh.
You have to ask Josh about the orcas who hunt on land. That's what I covered on Scana.
Oh yeah,
right? Because
the famous pictures. Oh man, they're some of the most epic pictures and videos.
So cool.
Yeah, they're so cool.
Um,
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, the skin lesions make me nervous. The body weights aren't a thrill.
They're very low.
But I feel, again, it's one of those, we do a really fine job of ignoring the big issues, the lack of Chinook salmon here, right? It's like that is their primary food source. And it was fascinating going to Superpod, which is the big organization where this stuff is discussed every few years in Washington State. And we realized when we were speaking there, my wife Rain, who shot most of the 100-year-old whale, and I were there for the last one before the pandemic. And we're shocked to discover they knew pretty much nothing about what was going on up here. They didn't know about the Trans Mountain Pipeline, but also we knew nothing about what was going on down there with trying to reach the Snake River. And we went, okay, we're just across a border that, I mean, I can see the US from the shore, right? Like I can go down the beach and I'm looking at America. It is not far away. And yet the divide is so tremendous that here I am, I've spent years of my life now studying southern residents. And until I attended Superpod, I didn't know what was up with the Snake River Dam. And, you know, until going there, talking with Ken Balcom, talking to some of the people there. But they did not know about the Trans Mountain fight at all. So Rain actually gave a talk and went, I'm going to just walk you through this because you need to know this. We can talk about Granny some other time. We've got 5 minutes on stage. I'm just going to talk to you and go, hi, there's this pipeline. There's a report that came up. That was actually, sorry, going back to what actually made me political. There was a report that came out on this pipeline expansion. And one of the things in the report was if this expansion happens, it would cause, the phrase was, significant adverse effects to the southern resident orcas. So what I did was I did my journalisting and I reached out to all of the experts that I knew and went, okay, I know I'm not the scientist here, but significant adverse effects, and what was then a population of 82, and wow, what we wouldn't give for 82 right now, seems like a really bad combo. How does a population this small survive significant adverse effects? And person after person after person said they do not. This happens. This is endgame. And I went, so you're going to say this to this panel, right? No, I can't. What do you mean you can't? Well, I contributed to this report, or I work for this organization, or I'm in the United States and therefore I don't have standing. So I've interview after interview after, but then they all went, but you'll say it, right? I went, I'm a journalist. I don't do that. And they went, well, somebody has to say it. And so I do interview after interview for a publication here called the National Observer, do this story where they all talk. And then I reached out to one of the environmental organizations that was attending all of these hearings on the pipeline. And I said, so how many people, the day before the hearings were coming to Victoria, I reached out to this person who'd been in all of them and said, so how many people have mentioned the orcas? And he went, no one. What do you mean no one? He said, one person mentioned the orcas in passing. Oh shit. Right. So I basically stayed up that night, wrote a speech and went, I am not saying this if anybody else says it. I'm not saying a word. I don't, because I thought the moment I say this at this hearing, my life changes. I will no longer be seen as a journalist. And even though I'm just reporting the facts, there's no way around it. It's a political speech.
No, you're right.
And at first it was like, yep, we're only going till 5 o'clock. I was like listed at like 9 o'clock at night. Wasn't going to get to speak. Fine. Nope, we're going to go longer. So I gave the speech. The speech, my wife Rain recorded it. The speech went on the air, and immediately, right, I went from, if you look at stories about me before and after, I went from author to I'm almost always referred to after that as an activist or Orca advocate immediately. And all I was doing was reporting what all the scientists had told me, right? I was trying to make people cry while I was doing it, but that's, but I was basically going, sharing what I'd heard and what scientists were saying, which is they can't survive significant adverse effects.
So is there anything in the pipeline to solve this problem? Because big fossil fuel, they're a giant to take on, and they have so many lobbyists, and yeah.
The government of Canada has taken some of this shockingly seriously in terms of trying to mitigate. I have not had a good conversation with an expert in a while because pandemic. So I've spent less time off island where I would have been talking to more people. But what you are seeing is some movement around laws being checked, some movement around fish farms, and admissions that, maybe some of these diseases are getting out there. So the world of Alexander Morton and her work. You are seeing some movement. You're seeing some talk about the Snake River coming down. You aren't really seeing anything on clean up the Fraser River so that we can get more Chinook. Like I still feel like there's an element of sleight of hand of pay no attention to the lack of salmon.
Yeah.
Well, I think there was a hearing about whether or not there should be commercial fishing of the Chinook salmon. And I think that it was turned down in favor of the fisheries instead of the orcas. And that's what I think is currently on the books.
What was interesting was this was happening in Alaska. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it was, part of what was tough was, like Donald Trump on his way out the door kind of ended environmental protections. And like one of the more shocking things that was just too depressing to think about, the US military does all sorts of acoustic tests, which are potentially fatal to these whales.
Yeah.
And they had the rights to accidentally kill a handful of whales, changed to they could accidentally kill all of them, basically. Gosh. And that was one of the last things that happened out the door. So some of these things have been rolled back under the new administration. American law is not my specialty at all.
Yeah.
But I know that some of them roll back, some haven't. So it's paying attention to legal stuff, the legal issues as well, in terms of where the protections are. But like I'm feeling optimistic that there appears to be movement on the major issues affecting the orcas and the Salish Sea. And there is so much phenomenal coverage around these whales on Vancouver Island and in Seattle, right? You don't even get the same coverage in Vancouver, like not same, just cross over the water. You do not see the same love for the orcas. But on Vancouver Island, phenomenal coverage, phenomenal attention is being paid. And Seattle, the coverage is epic. All of the media there is so on top of any story related to the orcas. So that gives me hope because there's a level of awareness, there's a level of concern, a level of passion, right? So with Canada, that's what I'm fighting for. Is like care, freaking care. Yeah, people to care, right?
Well, yeah. In Ireland, we had this thing with Shell, and it was down in an area of conservation down the west coast of Ireland, and people were fighting for decades, but government were actually fighting against people to let this happen, and it is like the problem with Shell is echoed across, oil companies echoed across the world, and I just hope that we see the end of it.
I'm so with you.
Yeah.
I would like to see a very forefronted and very public American campaign to actually help, because there's so many organizations that they're nonprofit organizations that do talk about it, and it's never headline news. It's always rubbish. And that's very frustrating. But I do also wish that everyone would talk to each other, because I've noticed this, that people from different parts of the world, they don't talk to each other as much. People in New Zealand don't talk to people like Kenneth Balcom so much about their different populations. They don't compare notes, and I think that's a shame. I think that we should get everyone more geared up and more versed in each other's things and have that be regular, because it helps us maintain normalities and patterns. It helps us identify ecotypes, migration patterns. It's very cohesive, and it feels very broken. And what you do, I feel like that does bridge some gaps by doing so many different types of people and different scientists, which is why I like your work so much.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited that we've got 3 countries on Zoom right now. I just think that's magic.
I think Elaine is spot on there. You know, she's going to, like, if you grab the expertise of all continents on these things, I think you have a better chance of squishing these bleeding commercial interests, you know, that's affecting these animals and so many other animals for the sake of profit. Yeah.
Well, I want Lori Marino and Eric Hoyt to be linked up, and I want Ingrid Visser to be linked up with, you know, anyone that's left in the Salish Sea. Like, I want these conversations, and having all the heads of science come together and publicly say that we will lose the southern resident population if we don't change this, and effectively force the government to revoke the fishing for commercialism and let it be for the orca, because their weights are so low. The birth weight of those babies is so low. I mean, they're beautiful, and I want them to make it past a year to that safe point where they're going to make it to next season. I want them to, but the scientific community doesn't even consider them part until after they're a year old. And I want to change things like that.
You know
you want my big rant? It's like, I am so frustrated that we are playing this game where we are not naming them for a year. I hate that.
It's stupid.
Because the rationale for that is, well, we don't really want to get attached to them because they might die. That's exactly what we want to get attached to.
That's exactly why we need to name them.
They need to be named. Like, great. You want to wait till they've got a gender? Fine. If that'll make you happy, great. They need names now. We know one's a boy, one's a girl. Fantastic. Name them right now, so that if anything happens to them, we're caring, but also so that we know, so we're paying attention to them, because nobody cares about them when they have their freaking L numbers, right? Like,
well, it just doesn't.
Great.
It just doesn't compare.
It's just the first thing you do when you put somebody in prison is you take away their name and you give them a number.
Yeah.
That is about dehumanizing. That is how you dehumanize someone, is you take their name away. So the way you humanize someone or something, you give them a name, right? And yeah, you've caught me. I'm in the middle of like writing a rant that I was going to share with media here, going, great, we know their genders. Name them now, please. I know what the rationale is. It was a fine rationale when the population was making a comeback. I mean, it's one of the hardest things to get across to people. One of the reasons I was so excited to tell the story of the Southern resident when I started telling the story in 2016, 2017 with Moby, was this was a phenomenal story of a miraculous comeback of this population. Every single person that I was interviewing was excited. The 100-year-old whale was supposed to be a celebration of Granny, right? So I'm making this movie, which is a celebration of this population that is coming back from being nearly decimated by the capture era, right? See, at all of these orcas, like almost every orca that you have heard of that was in captivity in the early days was caught off the Salish Sea. They were almost all southern residents. So this population was decimated by us. They're making a phenomenal comeback. Everybody that I'm talking to is excited. Right, despite us, right? Everybody is excited. Everybody I'm talking to is like, yeah, there's going to be 100 of them soon. Like, that was where we were at.
I want to be excited about new babies.
Absolutely. So I finished this documentary. We are in what is known as picture lock, which means that everything about the documentary is approved, and we get the word that Granny has died. And suddenly this goes to, instead of being the celebration, and we thought we were going to basically be touring the world talking about this orca and how, this amazing population. And instead, we're watching people cry. That was not like, it was really and truly this celebratory thing that we thought were celebratory movie we thought we're making. And suddenly it's in memory of Granny, the new matriarch is. And I made the tragic mistake of when the current population of the Orcas is, and the number kept dropping. And same thing happened. I gave my speech to the committee, to the pipeline committee. The next day, like that night, we lost an orca. Like while I was speaking, we lost one of the southern residents. So when that speech was published the next day, I had to take down the number by one. Right. So I went from covering this phenomenally happy story, this super inspiring story about a comeback, to this just devastating story about, you know, the decline and decimation of this population by us. Oh, we've got to end on a happier note. We've got to go somewhere happier.
We've got to go somewhere.
Do you
We've
know
got
what?
to go
Yeah.
somewhere much happier than that. So, you're a professor at a college. Like, I want you to talk about being a professor at a college and having eager young students willing to be part of this organization. And
well, what's hilarious?
Smile. There's a smile. Let's get positive.
Yeah. What's hilarious is the stuff I teach. I mostly teach I teach writing classes, and I teach, going back to like my other passions, I teach writing classes built around the DC universe and the Marvel universe, and I teach writing classes teaching people how to write TV and film scripts. So, but
and you said
it's
you wrote
interesting.
for Transformers, right?
I did. I wrote this environmental episode of Transformers. I only wrote one episode, and it is the environmentalist, pacifist, super Canadian episode of Transformers, because I've never been good at writing violence, and Transformers is basically machines punch other machines, machines bomb other machines. So I was asked to pitch a Transformers episode, and my pitch was basically the tiger buddy of the tiger transformer is accidentally killed in the crossfire. The tiger transformers, the one with the sort of most developed conscience, goes, wow, we can regenerate, the planet can't, and the animals can't. I am leaving the Beast Wars. So this transformer leaves the Beast Wars and basically my pitch was he leaves the war and moves to Canada. And then of course, because of Transformers, there's a fight, and he still has to fight and save the animals because the battle lights the forests on fire. If you look up my episode of Transformers, it is like famous for infamous. I've met so many young people who went, "You made me cry watching Transformers."
How dare you?
That would be my generation. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but it's like I'm because it was like this. Like really, it's one of the most environmentalist things they've ever written, right? Going, robots can be repaired. Earth can't be repaired. I mean, it was probably even less subtle in the original draft of the script than the one that went there. But yeah, I read Transformers. I've written all sorts of stuff, and I teach an introduction to fine arts course here, which I quite love. But it's funny, I didn't realize that I still talk about orcas a lot until one of my students, who's working as my assistant right now, dude, shut up, Courtney. Hi, Courtney Bell. So one of my students who's working as my assistant this summer wrote a profile of me for a class, and basically she wanted to interview me about my orca work. And in the profile, she mentioned that somehow I managed to mention orcas and how to protect them in every single class. That somehow I still slide that in, that I'm there talking about the Marvel universe, and I'm not aware of doing it, but she's taken several of my classes. She said, "Nope, you do it. You sneak in and go save the whales. Somewhere in your class, you get that in." So, yeah,
that's very funny.
Well,
I just want to thank you for all of the good work that you do, because I think it does make a difference, and it's starting to chip away at people.
Awesome.
It is.
Mark, looking at your strengths of being able to use the translation of emotion in your stories, I think you'll be well equipped to actually bridge the gaps and use that same strategies to effect change. But it's not a new story. You've been doing it for many generations, or decades, I should say, generations. But it's been a pleasure to talk to you today, and I hope this goes out far and wide. This conversation, it's been fascinating, and
thank you so much. This has been a treat.
Yeah.
So thanks very much.
I'm still excited.
I will let you know what I end up writing out because of this conversation. Like, I now have to write the op-ed on giving those babies names.
Yeah,
absolutely do.
Yeah.
Absolutely do. And if you want to co-author, I will come in as an expert and help reason and rationalize why it's a good idea.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Elena.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for your effort.
If you're not a member of the group already, Mark, please join. Please join.
Absolutely. Happy to.
And say hello to everybody when we publish this one. And absolutely plug all your books and plug your podcast and plug everything. I think, your message needs to be heard. So.
And our group has gotten a little over 50,000, 55,000 people.
In our group?
Yeah.
It's coming up to, it should be 57,000 in a few days.
See, and this is the kind of thing that I was talking about earlier, is giving you even more of a platform, because his group reaches worldwide. It's not just in Ireland, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And it is just it's an orca enthusiast group, but they're so eager to learn. And when I have time, I do write educational pieces for them, and they're ready to hear this kind of stuff, and they're ready to care. That's 57,000 people ready to care.
That's awesome. That is so exciting.
And Nick, you deserve credit for what you built.
Oh, look, I'm not doing anything special. There's people all over the world that love Orca. There's people who just wants to see, they mainly want to see pictures. They mainly want to hear stories. This is not something that's, sliced bread. It's in our nature to love what we see, behavior, and what we see in ourselves. So I think that also is reflected in Orca. We see a lot of ourselves in them, and I think if we could just go along and show that and bridge past this desire of ours to gain profits and cut the corruption out of it, they should have a lovely, natural, clean environment to live in, like we do. And I think if we can say the message, hey, look, this is a reflection of our own environment, and look what's happening to them, and we're doing that to them. Let's use those first as a model on how to fix ourselves. So the group is like that. That's the whole aim, is to provide education, proven, factual stuff, to be able to educate people, make influences on all of those people, and hopefully there are people like you, Mark, that get inspired and make change throughout the world. That's hopefully. And you're doing that. You're doing that too, and so is Elena, and so is everybody on the group. Anybody that loves Orca is doing that. Yeah. So
very exciting.
So thanks again, everyone, and yeah, it's lovely. I like this one. You feel the passion, everybody here, don't you?
Oh yeah. And so nice to meet you in real life, Elena.
It's so nice to actually meet you.
So I'll end
going. We'll keep it going.
Yes, please.
I'll end the recording here. Thanks very much, everybody, for tuning in, for listening through the whole thing. If you do, please subscribe, like, and comment. So please do that. And thanks very much for listening through the entire thing. Thank you.